Ka te ake nei rā te mihi ki a tātou, ko whakarauika mai nei, ko whakakotahi mai nei, I runga I te karanga o te pōnei, ara te ruku ki tēnei mea te rangatahi, me ona hua, me ona rawa katoa nei rā a te tira whakamātaki, e mihi kau atu ana ki a koutou. Kia tūtuki pai ngā whai mō te hui nei, o tēnei hui topa, me tika ka tika me inoi tātou. Nō reira, waire I runga, waire I raro, waire I wanganui, waire I ngā taumahatanga. Tēnei tātou e tuku whakamoimiti, e tuku roimata, kia rātou, kua wehe ki tua te ārai, rātou hingana ki tēnā marae, ki tēnā marae. Hoki wairua mai ki a tātou, tēnei tātou, kuruku ki ngā kaupapa hōhonu, kia wānanga I tātou, kia puta ki te whai au ki te ao mārama, tūturu whakamaua ki a tīna, tīna. Haumie huie, tai kie. Cool, what a great turnout. Seen some good numbers turn up to our Zoom, and we are live on Facebook. So before we get into it, just a reminder, everyone, keep your microphones on mute, the speakers, keep your cameras on so we can see your beautiful faces, please. If you do have questions throughout the night, either flick them through on the chat or likewise on Facebook. We have people monitoring both of them, and we'll get those questions to the speakers. Before we jump into it, though, I'll pass over to our CEO to welcome everyone. So, Mel, over to you.
Kia ora koutou, ngā mihi kia koutou, e mihi ana ki ngā kia Tami. Thanks for the intro and the karakia. And thank you all for joining. As Tami said, it's great to see big numbers come and listen to this one, to this webinar. As you'll see on Facebook and on the invite that this is webinar 3 in our series, which is leading up to a big event that we'll talk about no doubt in our next webinar or before then, that we are hoping to announce soon with our partners Biosecurity New Zealand. This webinar is one of the series leading up to that, so I want to acknowledge Biosecurity New Zealand for their support of these webinars. This one in particular is probably one of the ones that I'm most excited about, and I know Tami is, because this is about the next generation of biosecurity kaitiaki or biosecurity governors, and a mixture of those educators, researchers and the like. So we're really excited that our Rangatahi representatives have joined us today. Rangatahi is a loose term, isn't it, Tami? Because some of us like to think we're still rangatahi even if we're not, but it is one that we're really excited about, because this is an opportunity to think about the capability and the capacity we need in the future for our system. So really excited and really grateful that they've given us their time today. Back to you, Tami.
Thanks for that, Mel. And as Mel said, this kaupapa, the kaupapa of tonight was quite often we get asked, how do we get more people into the biosecurity system? And before everyone joined, Mel made a good point that if you're from a whānau of firefighters, it's highly likely you'll go down that path. If you're from a whānau of forestry workers, you'll go down that path. So how do we put some information in front of rangatahi or whoever else that might get them interested in joining the biosecurity system? We all know that we could do with more support and more people in the space. So we thought, let's have a kōrero with some people who are in the space or involved in the space some way, shape or form. And we were really fortunate to get some great guests that could help us help by sharing their stories. And I say really fortunate because some of their stories are absolutely fascinating. Before we get into that though, we are going to be running a competition for this webinar tonight. So we have a couple of prizes to give away. And what we'd like to do is if there is something that inspires you, that is shared by some of the speakers, comment on the Facebook Live and we will draw a random winner from that. So if you hear something like, comment saying, I like that because, and share your reasoning why. At the end of the competition, we'll pick a random winner and contact them to give them us a prize. Right, before we jump into it, I will now introduce all the speakers, or give the microphone to each of our speakers and then introduce themselves. So first up, I'll start with you, Marcus.
Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Marcus-Rongowhitiao tōku ingoa, ke te taha o tōku māma ko Te Aroa, Ngāti Kahanunu, Ngāti Parauna iwi, ke te taha o tōku pāpā ko Ngāi Tahu te iwi. Kia ora everyone, my name is Marcus-Rongowhitiao Shadbolt and I am a research and policy analyst at Te Tira Whakamātaki. I've been in the biosecurity space for only a few years now and I'm really looking forward to sharing a lot of that with everyone else and answering any questions. Kia ora.
Thank you, Marcus. And as you can see, Marcus works for Te Tira Whakamātaki. And before I do carry on, we do have a special guest tonight who's joined us, Matua Kevin Prime. He is part of our kahui and has long given us good guidance in this space. So tēnei te mihi ki a koe matua, nei rā tēnei o te tira whakamataki e mihi kōatua kia. Next, we will go to you, Mereana. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Kia ora tātou. Ko nongo taha me maua o ngā maunga, ko te aroa me mā tātua ngā waka, ko te aroa me ngaitirangi ngā iwi, ko Tauranga te moana, ko Ngāti Whakaue me te whānau o Taufao, ngā hapu, ko Tūno Hopu, Whakaue me Rangiwaia, ngā marae, ko Morrison, rawa ko Rolleston, o ku ingoa whānau, ko Joshua Hanrahan, tōku hoa rangatira, ko Miranga Caitlin Hanrahan, tōku ingoa.
Tēnā koe, Mereana. Slightly awkward having our first two speakers from Te Aroa. It's like I've picked this somehow, I think. So with that, we will go to the coast, I think. Rīpeka, would you like to introduce yourself?
Ai, no te tairawhiti, tēnā koutou katoa, ko Mātiti, te taumata tiro o Tāmanuhiri, ko Pūtahi te maunga, ko Maraitaha rawa ko o Māpire ngā awa, ko Horauta rawa ko ngā tuki mata whārua, ngā waka, ko ngā Tāmanuhiri rawa ko ngā pui, ngā iwi, he uri ahau no Rongo mai wahine, Ngāti Parau me Te Aupauri hoki, ko Rīpeka Raihania ahau. Kia ora, I'm Rīpeka, and at the moment my mahi is doing a summer research report, and that's with Te Tira Whakamātaki, and essentially looking at what are rangatahi aspirations for Te Taiao and how we responding to those concerns. I'm also an undergraduate student studying towards a conjoint Bachelor of Laws and a Bachelor of Arts majoring in Māori Studies. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Ao, piri tonu ki te tairawatira. Adrian, will cross over to you.
Kia ora tātou hui mai nei. Ko Adrian Peachey tōku ingoa. He uri tēnei no te aitanga mahaki, no te whānau akai, no Ngāti Parau, no Tainui hoki ahau. Kia ora everyone, my name's Adrian. I am a, what's my role? Cody Protection Biosecurity Specialist at Northern Regional Council. So my mahi is to save our rākau rangatira. Kia ora.
Kia ora. And finally, we'll shoot up to Te Tai Tokerau, Waata.
Ai, tēnā tātou te whānau, ko oro whana te maunga, ko Rangihiki te aua, ko Māmari te waka, ko te Aupauri, ko te Rarua o ku iwi, he uri whakaeke ahau, no muri whenua, ko Waata tōku ingoa. Good to be here. Thank you, Tome, for the intro. I am working for MPI in the general surveillance space. And I'm not sure if I made the rangatahi bracket, but I'm glad Tom has included me because I feel even younger now. So, kia ora tātou.
Tēnā koe, bro. If you're rangatahi, I'm a rangatahi, so we all win, I think. What we'll do now is we'll quickly whip around the room again. I know some of them have shared what they do for a living, but we'll quickly go through each of our guests and we'll get them to describe what they do and what a typical day might look like for them. So, Marcus, we'll go back to you. What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, for Te Tira Whakamātaki, I'm a research and policy analyst. So a lot of that mahi will involve me reading through document after document after document. Some of our more recent work has been, well, for me particularly, has been looking at some government policy submissions. So we'll do that as a unit at Te Tira Whakamātaki, and we'll effectively just have 3 or 4 of us on a document or sharing through it, coming up with whatever, brainstorming whatever recommendations we think of and putting those together into submission form. Another project I've been doing has been looking at creating some public documents, just sort of fact sheet type things, informing communities that we work with about all sorts of different stuff. I'm also doing my thesis at the moment at Canterbury University, looking at seed banking and seed conservation. So I'm usually splitting my time between the two of those. Yeah, that's probably a typical day for me.
Awesome. I don't know how you find time to eat or sleep amongst all of it. And Marcus is a powerhouse in the Te Tira Whakamātaki policy team. So thank you for all your work. Mereana, what is a typical day like for you? What is your journey like?
it changes every day, so it's kind of hard to plan what we do. But typically, I'm one of 5 apprentices at Taranaki Maunga project. So basically, we just are up on the maunga every day, either running our trap lines or fixing our trap lines or putting out stoke boxes on new traps, trap lines that we have. But a typical day is generally every day up on the maunga, fixing trap lines like I was today. So yeah, that's a typical day for me.
Oh, that sounds like an ideal day for me, being out in the bush. That sounds awesome. Rīpeka, I know you shared with us, you've probably got an interesting lens to view biosecurity, in that you're not knees deep in it. What does a typical day look like for you?
Oh, yeah, that can definitely vary. Some mornings it's a 5 o'clock wake up to go to wakaama training, or other days it's a sleep in until class. But at the moment, I'm an undergraduate student. I'm in my 2nd year studying towards law and Māori studies. Law, definitely an interesting subject, a lot of hard work, but it's main learning about history, tools and all sorts of techniques, not just in my 2-year classes, but even in my reo and Māori courses, but also applying that to our biodiversity mahi here. And it's also very interesting looking at all like the policies and logistics to, I guess, address all sorts of concerns and anything to do with Te Taiao, really. It's quite interesting, yeah. So yeah, typical day, studies, lectures, especially online because of this COVID stuff. And when I do have time is to do my TTW mahi, which is my research report, as I said before, looking at the scope of rangatahi aspirations for Te Taiao and how we're responding to those concerns. And fortunately enough, I've already done most of that mahi, all the practical data collection stuff this summer in Tairāwhiti. And yeah, at the moment, it's literally the fun stuff, which is all the typing and putting it in a nice report. But yeah, that's pretty much me at the moment. Kia ora.
Nice. A lot to unpack there, and I'll be keen to jump into some of that later as we get into it. Adrian, typical day for you?
Just like everyone else, my typical day is quite varied, so I just help out where I'm needed. A core part of my job is around protecting trees that don't have disease and around preventing disease spread. So developing management plans with landowners and helping them still do the things that they want to do without spreading disease. So that'd be a core part, and that's quite varied in itself. So little short, sharp answer for you, Tami.
Now, well, I understand there's another challenge in that you're living in Gisborne and Mahi's up north, so you're back and forth.
Yeah, so currently my family's moved home to Gisborne, and because of everyone was working from home from COVID, we were all locked up anyway, so it just gave me the opportunity to be locked up in the centre of the world, Gisborne. Nice.
Hi. Waata, I know you and I've shared many a conversation over a cup of tea on what a typical day looks like for you, but yeah, what does a typical day look like to you for our listeners?
Yeah, varied as well. There's a core part or core function of my role, and it's around strengthening biosecurity outreach to communities, to iwi, to industry, and that's about trying to find ways to better invite people to engage with the biosecurity system, and to simplify the process. The biosecurity system works passively and actively in terms of the surveillance system. And the passive area is about the 0800 number, see a pest, find a pest, report, and then there's online aspect to that reporting, and then what we're trying to do in the core function of my role is just trying to improve transparency, trying to reach communities that perhaps don't understand the biosecurity system, or at least are so distant from sort of our big busy areas, that biosecurity can seem like something that isn't relevant for them for whatever reason. But that's probably the core function of my role. But as everybody else on this call probably knows, if you're Māori and you work in the public sector, that's only job number one. You got about 13 jobs after that. That's not written in your job description, but or not. And that's part of navigating the cultural capability space in the biosecurity system as well. I mean, this webinar is testament to that point. You know, we're trying to improve that capability and resource aspects of Te Ao Māori for the biosecurity system, because we obviously know how Eurocentric the biosecurity system is, but maybe that's another corridor for another webinar.
That's a good corridor as well, and I think we could easily dive into that and spend good hours, days, weeks on that one. But you're right. If you look at our guests, they cover a range of roles and responsibilities within the biosecurity system: policy, and law and legislation, active on the ground, that post-border and long-term management, right through to people right in the heart of the biosecurity system. But all of our guests are Māori. All of our guest speakers are Māori, so they fulfill these roles while being Māori. And a lot of people don't realise the challenges that comes with, given that the system we're in. Again, that's a corridor for another time. Mel, I'll pass over to you now.
Kia ora, and thanks for the intros and letting us get to know you all a bit better. I wanted to reflect on something that Tami said right at the beginning, which is biosecurity isn't one of those jobs that a lot of people know about, or they don't think about as a job that you might want to get into. So I want to ask our guests about how they got into biosecurity, or what their connection is to the biosecurity system. And I want to start off with you, Adrian, by putting that pātai on you first, and before we open it to the floor. How did you get into biosecurity? Is it where you wanted to be? Did you fall into it? Or what helped you access your role or get into your role in the biosecurity system?
Good question, Mel. So I guess because this is a Rangatahi webinar, I'll take you back to high school. So at high school, my careers advisor introduced me to this thing called biosecurity, and to me, from his explanation, it sounded like kaitiakitanga or being a kaitiaki, and so I thought that was a good pathway for me. I was lucky enough that at the time there was a degree at Lincoln University that actually had biosecurity in its qualification, so I thought that was a straightforward pathway, being the only qualification in the country at the time. I thought that was the obvious choice, but when I went there, I found that the studies didn't have the indigenous perspective that I perceived kaitiakitanga to be, and then I reached out to I try to find mentorship. I try to find those Māori mentors, and that's when I ran into people like you, Mel, and became the coattail, and that's when I truly got introduced to what biosecurity is. It's not just the forest or the taiao. It's not. The battles are fought everywhere at all levels, and so that's where I was introduced to what it really means to be in the biosecurity space. It is niche. There's not a lot of people in it. There's a lot of people working in industries around side of it, like conservation, but the battles are definitely fought at all levels, and it was through the process of being a coattail and going along to these different meetings and meeting a lot of different people, you start to understand the different battles being fought in different places, and where you can really get your wins.
Kia ora, thanks for that, Adrian. I want to open it up to the floor and to any of our other guests to talk about how they got into biosecurity. Waata, I mean, you're working in the heart of biosecurity at the moment with MPI. Do you want to share your journey?
Yeah, look, I can't discount the effect that luck has on the life choices that you make, and that played a big part in me joining biosecurity. I remember this vividly. I was on the plane coming back from the UK. I'd done my time over there, and I saw this like ad that came up when we're just about to land, and it was about this biosecurity stuff, and I thought it was quite interesting, and I thought, you know, this was something so foreign to me. I didn't have a job, I was unemployed, so I just thought I might just apply and see where it takes me. So that's really the long and short of it. The rest of it, I mean, you know, for Māori, I think we have this sort of intuitive connection to te taiao, and I think biosecurity is biosecurity captures some elements of kaitiakitanga and what it means to be Māori, or at least, I shouldn't say that because that's not that's not the criteria by which we should judge your Māoriness. But I think that's why biosecurity can be digested so well by Te Hunga Māori, or Te Iwi Māori, is because it's elements that we really connect with. I grew up north in the country, so even though I didn't know particularly what biosecurity was per se, I understood its sort of scope and function. But yeah, that's really how I got into it. My qualifications were not in biological. Well, geography was my major at university, and I'm doing postgraduate work that's sort of related to biosecurity in a way, but again, that's another conversation. But yeah, nothing special from me, Mel. Just persistence, I should say, though, persistence and belief, because I didn't see most of our rangatahi, they don't see themselves in these jobs because they don't. Perhaps it's that they don't see it, and or the confidence or the self-value. I mean, that's another subject for another webinar, far out, talking about everything except the question. But yeah.
Kia ora for that. There's probably two things that you raised that I want to ask the other presenter, the other guest to comment on. And one is, or Adrian, you said this about coattails, but I think coattails is not quite the right term. It's opportunities, as Waata said, isn't it? It's seizing opportunities and having access to those. And Marcus, I wonder if you want to talk about some of the opportunities you've had. And then the second one I'll chuck over, and I do want to come back to everyone, to you, Rīpeka, because the other one, Waata, you raised, which is a really good point, is you did everything outside of biosecurity, but here you are in the biosecurity space. And I wonder if Rīpeka has some reflections on being a law student now operating in an environmental space. So I'll hand over to you, Marcus, and Rīpeka as well.
I guess I can go first there. Well, I guess I can kind of start in high school as well, like Adrian did. I didn't really know quite where I wanted to go afterwards, but I knew I did want to be in the science space. So I went to university and started in biological sciences for my undergrad. From that, I had the opportunity to be involved in a summer scholarship program working with Professor Jason Tilianakis at the University of Canterbury, and was doing a project with him and some of his PhD students looking at invasive plants in New Zealand and how some of our natives interact with them. And then from that was able to do another summer scholarship the following year, working with one of our TTW Kahui Kaumātua Matua Jim Doherty, and had a really cool opportunity to do a project with him and another professor, Jamie Ataria, looking at the unique names that our native and endemic plants have all throughout Māoridom and all through the Māori world, and the meanings behind those names and how they differ, between iwi, between hapu, between whānau, and why they differed and why that was important. And so it was really through those two projects that I was able to find my way into biosecurity. And I guess I was kind of lucky, like we said before, luck is a huge part of it. I was lucky enough that I was able to get these opportunities and join Te Tira Whakamātaki as my first job out of university, which was immediately immersed straight into that Māori science space, and didn't have to go through a lot of other challenges that a lot of other people have when they first start out in this sort of industry. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for now, I guess.
Ora Marcus, Rīpeka.
Hi, kia ora anō. Yeah, just thinking about how I got into biosecurity, kind of reflecting on, I guess, some of my upbringing. I was born in Wellington, in the city, and it was when I was about 12 or 13, my whānau and I moved to Te Mātua Māui, moved to Napier. And it definitely is a different way of life, further, I guess, more rural you get. And even living in Hawke's Bay, going back up the coast to Te Rāwhiti to see whānau there, and it was interesting. I never understood, I guess, how different some of these ways of living were until I moved back to Wellington, and seeing how some people's views on te taiao are different, or I guess sometimes it's not as evident to care about things like that when you live in the city. And I guess comparing the two as well, living up the coast and living in a city has kind of not only affirmed the importance of biosecurity, but also the affirmation of cultural identity, with the knowledge and connection to my whānau, whakapapa and whenua up the coast, it kind of made a drive for kaitiakitanga. And I feel like that's it can be a general thing for a lot of people. The more you have to connect to with your whānau and your tūranga waiwai, that gives more of an incentive to be kaitiaki, which also enables the use of mātauranga Māori in these big holistic approaches and problems. Because after all, we do identify with our maunga awa. And so those places are really important to us. And yeah, by like being connected to those places kind of makes that connection pretty much. And so that's kind of how I kind of got onto biosecurity. It wasn't until a bit later though, so I didn't necessarily grow up in that space, but kind of grew on, like you plant the seed and it just grows and absorb all that information and all that knowledge. So that's kind of how I got into that. You mentioned before, Mel, about how some of the legal aspects and I guess that kind of background has kind of combined with this mahi. Well, thinking about it, I guess a lot of it is to do with the policy level stuff and the ground level stuff. Especially when I went up the coast, it's interesting how sometimes what could be a theory, like put pen to paper, that could sound like all good, but when it is a practical outcome, sometimes it can be quite different than what is anticipated. So I guess in that, situation, I think it's really important that everyone kind of works together to kind of make those two things cooperate well. But yeah, that's kind of my kōrero on that. So kia ora.
Older. And I want to wrap up my question before I hand it back to Tami by asking you, Mereana, how you connect to biosecurity. And is it an obvious connection when you're an active kaitiaki on the ground doing what lots of people would classify as conservation? Many of us would classify as biosecurity. How do you connect to biosecurity, and is that connection obvious, or are they one and the same and we just have different terms for them?
Well, with what you said before, Mel, about not like many rangatahi really knowing about this kind of mahi, like that was me. I didn't even know this existed, really. I mean, I think all throughout high school, I said I wanted to work for DOC, but that's because that's all that I knew was just DOC. And so, and I look back on, like, the same as Rīpeka, I look back on my childhood. I grew up in Makitu, a small little town on the east coast, and our whare backed up right on the moana, and so we had that right there. We had our kura was right on our pā site, Aramakitu, Poke Maire Pā, and so we had the ngahere right there. And I just remember, just doing lots of trips, learning about the wetlands and the dotterels and Makitu. And so I think just as a kid, I was just really exposed to the taiao, and was very aware of it. And I've still got it today, actually. I had to do a this is me type of thing in primary, and I wrote I want to be a marine biologist. I didn't even know what that really meant back then. I just knew you got to work with the moana, and that's all that I really wanted to do. So yeah, I went throughout high school and I was like, I want to work for DOC. Like I said before, that's all that I really knew in the conservation taiao realm, I suppose. And then so I've moved to Taranaki at the start of last year, living here in Waitara. And then I was just looking for jobs. I always knew I wanted to do just anything outside. I've always been an outside junkie, love being out in the outdoors. And so I always knew I wanted to do something outdoorsy. And here in Taranaki, I feel like you can't really escape, being an outdoor person. So yeah, I just saw this mahi as a field kai mahi for Taranaki Maunga project advertised, and then I saw that it was also through the perspective of Te Ao Māori, and I think at that point in my life I was really hungry for our culture, our reo, just everything, and so I was like, to have the two together seemed too good to be true kind of thing. And so yeah, that's kind of my journey as to how I've gotten into the space, and yeah, I really love it. It's good.
Those are some awesome journeys on how everyone got into their different fields. So thank you all for sharing that. And again, giving us an opportunity to get to know you better. Staying with you, Mereana, what are some cool lessons from your time within the biosecurity system?
It's kind of a hard question to answer, I think. I'm still so fresh to this mahi. I've been in my role now for 6 to 7 months now, I think. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around just navigating my way through the ngahere, learning about the different rākau, the plants and the different manu, and just getting my head around, wrapping my head around the technology and stuff that we use. So I'm still just in that phase of just learning the ropes of my mahi. But in terms of that, like with what I said before, how our mahi is through the perspective of Te Ao Māori, and so I think that's one thing I didn't expect beforehand, was just learning so much about my Māoritanga and just being confident in that. I think that is something I'm learning, but will forever learn, I think. And yeah, I mean, I was just, like running the tracks that we do, there's the hill, Kaitaki Ranges is full of past sites. And I just can't help but to think of our tupuna when I'm running those tracks, to think of like, man, what did they see? Like, what did they hear? What was their experiences? And so I've honestly never thought about our tupuna so much than I have in the last 6 to 7 months. Like, they really like just come to the forefront of my brain. I just like am thinking about what did they see and just all that kind of stuff. So I think that's the lesson that, I'm learning and will still learn, is just learning more about my Māoritanga, our culture, and yeah.
That's a powerful lesson as well. And I think for anyone that's walked in the bush, you can't help but think that, and we've got all these cool new tools and technology, boots and GPSs that can help us, but they had a technology unto themselves. So yeah, real powerful answer. Rīpeka, sticking with the same question, what lessons have you learned so far, given that you're in the midst of study?
Lessons, just on the top of my head, definitely time management. That's a main one. But oh man, yeah, definitely a lot of lessons since working with biosecurity. I guess a big one for me would definitely be perspective on a lot of things. And I guess, especially with the work I've been doing, you take the issue or whatever is your main thing, and thinking about, or what happens if, say, something affects it, and all these flow-on effects that come out of one issue. Like, for example, you think of something like water, and then you say, okay, well, what if we ran out of water? Or what if it got polluted? What do we do now? And you get you thinking, oh gosh, well, what if this happens? How does this affect people? How does this affect the environment? And then all sorts of flow-on effects and implications. And that's kind of, I guess, it's not just an environmental way of thinking, I guess, in a way. Like, I've kind of applied that sort of thinking, I guess, to other aspects of my mahi, and taking away, I guess, what Te Tao can teach us and what we can learn from these natural processes, if that kind of makes sense, in this big holistic system. Yeah.
Oh boy, these are good ones, especially the time management one. I can learn from that as well. Adrian, given your experience, and you've traveled a good chunk of the country, what are some lessons that you've picked up along the way?
Yeah, probably to tautoko what Waata said, and it's probably another wānanga in itself, is probably how to walk the tightrope as Māori within the industry, I guess you'd call it, because there's a lot of taumaha that comes with that. But I guess the biggest learning I've learnt from that itself is approaching problems. So approaching problems in a way that leaves both your mana and the mana of you and whoever you represent intact. And I think if we move that way, then that tightrope becomes a straight line. So yeah, hard lessons, but learned nonetheless.
That's good. These are real powerful lessons. And by the way, for those listening and viewing, we are capturing these notes. So we will share that with everyone as well in written form and written document. Waata, my wise sage friend, you would have picked up some good lessons.
Oh yeah, man. I'll try and condense them into one lesson. The biosecurity in New Zealand is the most inclusive, exclusive system in New Zealand. And I mean, what I mean by that is the biggest lesson I've learned in biosecurity is not one group is going to achieve biosecurity. That's the biggest, you know, maybe, you know, MPI can't solve or can't solve all the problems of biosecurity or create all the technology and innovation that's going to solve all the future problems of biosecurity. Māori can't do that alone. Communities can't do that alone. Councils can't do that alone. It's just the nature of biosecurity. You know, it's so pervasive, to excuse the pun, but I mean pervasive in the sense that it's in the ideological sense. It's just biosecurity. Yeah, just by its nature, it's so pervasive that it means that it's going to take. This might kind of sound like a stereotype, but it's going to take everybody to work together for it to. And MPI holds its hands up first and says it hasn't been the best historically. Obviously, we all know that. So that's probably the biggest lesson, is that, you know, we do it across, and it affects the biosecurity system is across it. It's across scales, up and down, and involves so many different groups. It involves every country we import and export to. You couldn't get a more globalized system. So that's probably the biggest lesson, is that, you know, I look at everybody on this line, and they probably have some sort of connection to biosecurity. We're all friends. We're going to debate, obviously. We're going to fight, and we're going to figure out, and MPI is going to try and devolve power in some sort of way. But that devolution of power also means devolution of responsibility as well. And so that's my biggest lesson, is that anybody who works in biosecurity is not your enemy, but your friend.
Kia ora, what a powerful lesson that one is as well. There's some awesome answers. Marcus, given your time in the space, what are some cool lessons you've picked up?
Yeah, I guess mine's kind of the same. You know, biosecurity is an incredibly multidisciplinary space to work in. You've got to be able to understand a whole lot of different systems and a whole lot of different ways of thinking for it to work. And that comes back to the whole, you know, it's going to take everyone together to get anything done. I mean, something just like, I mean, COVID's the perfect example of it. You know, it's taken a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of different people, a lot of different groups to even somewhat come close to a half decent response. And so I guess my big lesson in the biosecurity space is just being open to everything, being as open to new ideas, new disciplines, if you even want to call them that. And I guess that's been one of the advantages of being embedded really heavily in the Māori space, is that for Māori, you know, we don't really think of things as lots of different disciplines. We don't think of them as lots of different groups and categories that, you know, you have to be a specialist in this and only this if you want to be an expert in it. We're constantly working with multiple hats, like people like to say. We're constantly thinking in all sorts of different ways to see how the entire system works together. And I think that's especially important in biosecurity. You know, biosecurity can't be done in a vacuum. And so I guess that would be my big lesson there.
Kia ora. Ina I oti tēnei hui kone kua matua rā era whakaaro. If we were to end right now, those would still be some great whakaaro, but fortunately we've still got a good amount of time. So Mel, I'll pass over to you.
Yeah, fortunately we've got a good amount of time left, but not as much as we would like, given that we've got such an awesome panel. And I want to just acknowledge the comments in the chat, which are saying, you know, if you get a chance to look at it, have a look, saying, acknowledging how beautiful your kōrero is and how amazing it is to have young Māori talent, even if you don't think you're young Wāta, you are compared to me, young Māori talent coming through and having an open and honest conversation, because what you're talking about, what you're sharing with us will inspire others. You probably don't realise that, well, you're still young, but you will inspire others who get to listen to this to think about other opportunities and to reconnect with te taio. So I want to go a wee bit off the script that you were all ready for, so that after we answer the next question, we can open the floor to questions or do some quick fire questions. And I want to preface all of that by saying what I think we have all seen is an inspirational group of young and up and coming Māori biosecurity leaders, because they will all be leaders, I suspect. And so I suspect we will, Tami, end up having this group back on again. because I can see there being lots and lots of follow-up questions and people wanting to listen to you talk for another hour or so. But I can also see a nice wee road tour with this crew, sharing your whakaaro with the world. So my question to you then, because I want to keep the positivity going, what are some of the highlights that you've had in your life, in your career, in your work opportunities, things that you think sharing with others might inspire them to think about other roles or think about connecting to the environment or working in biosecurity. So share maybe a highlight you've had or something that's really inspired you or someone that's inspired you in your work journey so far. And I'm going to start with you, Rīpeka. Can you share a highlight with us?
Yeah, definitely some highlights. Probably the knowledge and I guess some of the kōrero taken away from people I meet in my mahi. You definitely get a new perspective on some of the things, especially some of the rangatahi and people from various kaupapa I talked to for my report. You definitely the knowledge, gaining the knowledge and networks has definitely been a highlight and learning. A person who has been a significant influence, you said, Yeah. Definitely, at the top of my head, my mum. She has been main influence in my mahi, especially because of all the knowledge she has, and she definitely helps me a lot with my mahi, but especially, living and going back to our tūranga waiwai and to our whenua, and I guess appreciating all that it means to be Māori. She definitely was someone that instilled us to me, my whānau. So, and that's definitely helped along with my mahi, but also every day, gotta love being Māori every day. But
Rīpeka, and acknowledge that your mum's online, so that's a good promotion, because that means you get your living away from home allowance, don't you, or get a kai. But no, your mama is inspirational to lots and lots of people, so well done for that. Waata, highlight for you or something that's inspired you? You're muted there, Hoa. You're doing the tummy.
Not many highlights, Mel. Probably I would take pride in some incremental change that I've seen happening in the past my years in biosecurity. And a big part of that is just influencing in what little way I can in my small role in the beast that is the biosecurity system, or MPI, I should say. There's been lots of people that I look up to in my life, but I mean, outside of my family and my childhood heroes, if I had to try and keep it around biosecurity, there's a lot of people in MPI that I won't name, that are really doing good stuff in the Te Ao Māori space and biosecurity space. And obviously yourself, Mel, Simon as well, the literature that you guys added to, Tame and his mahi. But yeah, it took too many people to acknowledge. But yeah, incremental change and influence will probably be my highlights.
Kia ora, thanks for sharing that. We didn't pay him to say us, by the way. That wasn't set up.
Got any vacancies, Mel? No.
Oh, Carmen is like going mental in the picture, see? That's your We're not allowed to poach on air live. That's not a good look. We can do that later. I'm going to hand over to you, Marcus. Highlights someone or something that's inspired you?
Yeah, I guess the easiest to start at the person who's probably inspired me the most, and I guess that would have been when I started out with some of my summer scholarship programs and had the absolute pleasure of working with and learning more than I could ever remember from Matua Jim Doherty. I guess you only really know how much you don't know when you start learning, and I realized there was a whole lot that I didn't know when I started working with him. One of our other colleagues, Jamie, always says how the first time he ever went to visit his home in Te Uruwera, it took them about 2 hours to walk up the driveway, just because Jim knew every single scientific English Māori name for every single plant and all of its uses, historic and current, and everything that it was possible to know about all these plants. And so that was definitely a huge highlight for me, and it's always good to get out in the bush and to do work out there. Yeah, that would probably be the main highlight for me and the inspiration for a lot of the stuff I do, just getting involved as much as I can in the Māori space, which I've been very lucky to get cemented in quite early on. Kia ora.
Well, thank you, Marcus. And what a lot of people don't know is that Matua Jim likes mentoring the rangatahi so much that last time we went up there, Kitty, who's online, I can see Kitty and I got demoted to a tent while the rangatahi got the house. So that's how important you guys are to Matua Jim. So Mereana, I'm going to hand to you. A highlight for you in your career and or a person that may have inspired you.
I work with a pretty cool bunch, so I just think my whole rōpū, like in Taranaki Manga project, they all inspire me, just because everyone just has like a vast like load of information, of knowledge, and so it's just, yeah, I'm pretty lucky with who I get to work with. So they all inspire me, and I get to work with them every day, so I'm inspired every day basically. And I think a highlight would be, I feel like ever since I've been in this mahi, it's, to be honest, just been like the floodgates have opened and it's just been like opportunity after opportunity. So just being able to connect with different rōpū, like we've just come back from the East Coast and did a trip and checked out some of the projects going on over there, and so that's where we met Tami as well. But we've just got so much kaupapa going on. Tomorrow I'm going to a Kiwi release. So it's just awesome stuff like that. And so, yeah, I just think, honestly, it's hard to just pick one highlight. There is so much. And just being out in the ngahere every day, that is honestly a highlight, I must say. Yeah. Kia ora.
Kia ora, thanks. And Adrian, for you, I'm sure you've got heaps of highlights.
We don't have time, I guess, to name all the people that have inspired me or have contributed to myself. One of them being Jim Doherty, definitely. I'm usually a person filled with questions, and I was filled to the brim when he asked these million sort of questions, and he said one thing and it sort of blew my mind, and I was sitting there dumbfounded. So I've had the opportunity to sit at the feet, excuse the expression, of a lot of rangatira, many of whom are probably on this live, including you, Mal. So not just taking the knowledge that they've given freely, but also their whakaaro and how they think and how they approach problems, and what's worked, what hasn't worked, and moving forward. One of those being, because we had a lot of roadblocks, and I'm thinking back to the time of things like the Y262 claim, and it took 20 years just for the report to come out. I felt real pukuriri with that. I was real angry. I was like, well, what are we doing now, sort of thing, And I remember Aroha Mead saying, well, the cure to that is success, and that blew me away. So I guess I take a little tidbits from everywhere, So I guess I'm like a sort of a Lego, and everyone's been adding these blocks to me, so I really get to stand on the shoulders of giants. But also to tautoko what Mereana said, definitely, there are rangatira everywhere. There are people in schools, kura kaupapa, there are people on the ground that just do work that is unseen. We are lucky enough to be seen, so therefore recognised. But a lot of these people who are doing sort of the mahi rangatira are actually on the ground, day to day, keeping kaupapa alive. And so even taking things from them, I feel like I'm just a vacuum, just take. I don't think I've given anything yet, so no highlights for me. So yeah, kia ora.
Well, you're giving now, Adrian, giving your time back to us. And to be fair, we drag Adrian into a few things. So you are giving back as well. I just wanted to, before I pass back to you, Tami, acknowledge a couple of the comments that have come through as well that say that this feels like one of them, I think it might be on Facebook, says it feels like a conversation with friends. So acknowledging that how freely you are sharing with us and how awesome that is. And I'll hand back to you, Tami, to do some Q&A, eh?
Yeah, you are really good speakers, elegant, getting your ideas across, so keep it going. We'll quickly turn now to quickfire, which is really hard given how, I think people would love to just keep hearing you guys speak. Before we jump into it though, just a reminder to everyone that our competition is going. So if you do comment on the Facebook, and I think we'll even do it on here as well, Comment something that you found inspiring or something that the Rangatahi have said that you find interest, and we'll pick a winner at the end of it and get your details to get the prize to you. First question that came through in the chat, could your journey be Wairua driven? I might expand on that, and I'll ask each of you, and these are real quick fire, and apologies, it shouldn't be a quick fire question, but how much does Māoritanga, your Māoritanga, play in your role? So if you could answer, I don't want to say too quickly, but we've got a bunch of questions that people have asked. So yeah, how much does Māoritanga play in your role? Marcus?
Well, to be quick, I guess it's a huge part. One part of my journey from early on was that I didn't really think I was that incredibly Māori, or didn't really know what those key things were that you look out for to know how Māori you are. And it wasn't really till I got into the space that I realized, oh, actually, this way of thinking and this is the way I approach these problems is a huge part of that. And so I think it's been a huge underlying driving force for all of my work and everything that I choose to get involved with now, both in work and in study.
Bye. Mereana?
Yeah, I have a very similar answer to Marcus. I just feel like the taiao and your Māoritanga, just they coexist and you can't have one without the other. So I'm learning so much about my Māoritanga, learning the reo. So yeah, that's me.
Kia ora. Rīpeka?
Yeah, for me, it definitely plays a huge role, being in touch with te taiao and the environment, just as tangata Māori have that interconnectedness with the natural world, like other indigenous cultures. And that's where we see a lot of themes of kaitiakitanga and tikanga, preservation of mātauranga, and being in touch with our, I guess, tupuna and our whakapapa in that sense. So that's really important to have that knowledge of Māoritanga in this line of work. And I guess for me, branching out to, say, like legal studies, looking at all that is te ao Māori and how that can cooperate with our, I guess, government and the Crown, and being able to exercise our tino rangatiratanga in those spaces where that requires a lot of cooperation with, I guess, people with different viewpoints or standings on that. So yeah, definitely is involved heaps in my mahi.
Kia ora. Adrian?
Short answer, yes, because we're trying to restore and enhance both tangible and intangible. So the Māori and the Wairua, and if we can't do one without the other. So short answer, yes.
Kia ora. Waata?
Yeah, short answer, yes. And Māoritanga a lot, but could be more.
All right, I'm going to reverse that question now. Is how much does biosecurity play outside of work for you? So we'll start from the reverse. Waata, how much does biosecurity play in your outside work life?
Yeah, a lot. Just because I frequent back up north a lot, so it's just the environment that I'm in a lot. So yeah, a lot.
Kia ora. Adrian?
Yeah, I think once you get sucked into any sort of system, you sort of you can't escape it in your home life. So like Waata said, a lot. You see yourself doing a lot of things outside of what you'd call work hours. In the biosecurity space, and how you operate. Again, restoring, enhancing the Māori of things isn't just purely biosecurity; it's everything. So you find yourself operating on that level everywhere.
Rīpeka?
Yeah, I would say the same. Just thinking about my lifestyle, like living in the city again, I'm quite lucky that I live near like Zealandia, so we get to see the fruits of all the labour of biosecurity, and being able to wake up and see kaka on the porch or tui and all sorts of our taonga species. And it's really important because, just quickly at the top of my head, one of the science papers we're doing talks about predator-free New Zealand, and it's interesting about how most are on board with all the knowledge they have about conservation, our ecosystems, and everything in between, So yeah, it does influence my way of living outside of work, and especially notably to my whānau who live in rural communities. Outside their work hours, you still got to have 2-minute showers. You still can't leave the tap running when you're brushing your teeth because you're only running on tank water. So definitely, yeah. All sorts of aspects outside of working hours.
Mereana?
Yeah, I just echo what everyone else is saying. Just a lot. just when I'm driving home from mahi, or just when I'm out on the weekends, I'm just naming as many rākau as I can. Or if I'm just talking to someone and I see a manu fly by, I've stopped talking to them and I'm checking out the manu. So yeah, it's taken over my whole life basically.
Kia ora. Marcus?
Yeah, I mean, the same as what everyone else has said again. Yeah, I mean, for one, I don't really know when work hours end, but yeah, it's constantly, it's the same sort of thing. You'll just be out for a walk or something, see whatever fly by or see something on the ground and just start spitting off facts to everyone who's around you, whether or not they want to hear them or not.
I imagine that was going to be the case, that there's no real distinction between biosecurity and your daily lives being Māori within your mahi. And I saw a really good quote by Te Wehi Wright. He's a Māori lawyer. I think it was him, maybe it was someone else. They said, be a Māori lawyer, not a lawyer who happens to be Māori. And I think the same is for this, is be a Māori biosecurity practitioner or expert rather than a biosecurity expert who happens to be Māori. So thank you for that. I've got so many more questions, but I'll quickly finish with one that we did have early on before we even went online. Someone said, what's the hardest part about your job? And I wanted to focus on the positive stuff, but I will ask this one because there are some people who want to know the nitty-gritty stuff getting into this. So if you could have a quick think about what is the hardest part of your job that you'd like others to know before they make that leap to have this basically biosecurity take over their lives. So Waata, we'll start with you. Oh, sorry, Mel.
I was going to say, can we add into that, Tommy, if it's okay? What's hard about your role or what you do, but what's something that people listening can do to help with that? So, thinking about where you work or the communities that you're in or the universities you're in, what is something that could help to alleviate that for you?
So I'll go to you first, Waata.
Cool. That sounded like 6 questions, Mel, so I don't know if I'll be able to answer them all. But the biggest difficulty obstacle for me is probably affects everybody else here is bridging perspectives and how any application or budget bid, you spend 80% of the document justifying what mātauranga is before you can actually lay out why you should. So that's probably a big obstacle, is bridging perspectives and worldviews, not wasting time having to justify things Māori. Takes up a lot of energy. And what was the second part of that question, Mel?
What
other people could
do to make it easier for you? Yeah.
Read a book? No. No. That one is that one's really around sort of ignorance, and so I would say find external sources of ways to improve your ignorance, me included. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Adrian.
I'll probably steal this from someone else and I won't name drop the person, but it's the kaupapa is easy to solve. It's the people in front of it that's hard. And that's pretty much, I guess, what's sort of the same lines of what Waata's saying. It's all these bridging different personalities, it's those justifications, it's the different perspectives. If we went down the route of, and I'll use my previous answer of upholding both your mana and the other person's mana, then that should alleviate that problem and we can tackle the kaupapa at hand. But first, maybe we have to take a step back, as Waata said, and look at the external resources and understand what mana is in the first place. So if we do that, then we'll know how to uphold each other's. So for me, definitely people. People are the biggest problem. The kaupapa is easy to solve. It's just that if we remove that person element or that people raru, then the kaupapa can be solved easier. So like Waata said, we spend most of our time dealing with people instead of the actual problem at hand. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Rīpeka.
I would be on the same whakaaro too, that some of the hardships involved with differing perspectives and sometimes the lack of involvement. But I think what could, address that is maybe providing more opportunities for, I guess, to get these motions going, because I noticed a lot of rangatahi I talked with, some of them might have been involved from the get-go because of their whānau, they always had an interest, or I guess grew up around te taio, etc. But for others, yeah, they kind of end up in that space and then find that they actually really enjoy it, or they really deeply care for it. So I think some ways to make that happen would be around education, opportunities for rangatahi or anyone really to get into that biodiversity, biosecurity space, just to plant the seed, all that's really is needed to be done is to plant the initial seed of knowledge, or I guess to take action, and then the rest will come through it. So yeah, definitely perspectives and education, but I think some things we worked around that.
Kia ora. Mereana.
Well, my challenge is more of a physical challenge, to be honest, because climbing up the kaitaki every day, it gets tough. Sore every day. My supervisor said to me, "You get fit, but you never stop being tired." And so, yeah, it's very true. So yeah, just constantly going up the maunga just gets physically tiring. And getting lost in the ngahere, that's a challenge. I've had that happen, and yeah, it wasn't a good experience. And I don't know how to overcome that. So maybe if I get lost enough, I can come back and tell you all.
That's if you make it out of the bush.
Yeah.
But that's a really good point as well. And I think those of us who have worked in the bush, we all know that. I've actually walked in the bush with you, and you are part mountain goat. You sprint through the bush. So man, I don't know how you think you're not fit. Marcus, over to you.
Well, I'm glad Mereana said that, because it was probably going to start sounding like an echo in here soon. My issue is probably the same as what everyone else has said. It's it was when I first started out in the space and was sitting on boards for this and that, or in meeting rooms for this and that, it could become quite draining and defeatist feeling when you're constantly just saying the same things over and over, constantly justifying why there needs to be a Māori voice at the table, why there needs to be a Mātauranga Māori component, why does this need to be here, why does that need to be there. And I guess the sort of fundamental way to fix that is kind of what Rīpeka said, where education is the way to solve that for the future, having people educated enough to understand why that's important, and then eventually the questions sort of go away and you don't have to sit there justifying it all the time. I know I've spoken to Mel a bit about this in the past. I guess one of the easy fixes for it, though, or one of the easy short-term solutions for people if they want to help out with that sort of challenges. I know we've got hundreds and hundreds of allies out there who aren't necessarily Māori in the space. And I've been lucky enough in some of the spaces I've worked with some really cool people who are allies are able to, start doing that for you. You can, if you're lucky enough to have those people in the spaces you're working in, they will start arguing those parts for you. They'll be the ones there saying, this is why we need the Mātauranga Māori involvement. And it becomes less draining in that way when you do have other people there supporting you for it. And it can be quite hard, I know. Historically, it's been very difficult for a lot of our older Māori in the space who have just spent, 20, 30, 40 years in the space just saying the same things over and over again at every single board meeting, every single trust meeting, everywhere they go. And so it definitely is getting easier, but I think one of those easy fixes is for our allies and those other people there to just sort of step in every now and then and say, on behalf of Māori, that Māori need to be at the table.
Kia ora. I'm sure everyone right now that is listening, and even if they watch this further on down the track, will agree that the future of biosecurity is looking amazing. With the level of rangatahi coming through, we are Aotearoa's biodiversity and taonga are in safe hands. We do have an announcement, but we can't announce it just yet. So this is a bit of a teaser. Stay tuned, follow our newsletter, but our next webinar, we hope to make an announcement on what that is. But this is me trying my best to keep people interested, but just know that something big is coming. But I'm sure everyone here would like to thank our guests. So on behalf of Te Tira Whakamataki, those listening, those watching, and those that will read the notes from this, Tēnei ka mihi ka tika ki a koutou I whai wā ki te whakawhera I au kōrero ki Wainganui a tātou. O tira ki te tohatoa I au kurihuna ki a tātou e noho pikare mai ana. So thank you on behalf of everyone listening and watching for sharing your knowledge, your stories, your yarns with us. And everyone has just been listening. I can see all the screens in front of me. Everyone has been listening intensely to everything you said. So our guests, you absolutely nailed the assignment. You really gave us more than we could ever ask for. So tēnei ka mihi ki a koutou. O tira ki a koutou I whai wā ki te hono mai, tēnei ka mihi ki a koutou. Thank you all for tuning in. Before I close, Mel, any final thoughts from you?
No, I was just going to say A+ for all of them. If I was still your lecturer, Adrian, you'd get an A. Rīpeka's got a report due in, so A for that. But yeah, no, you've all done exceptionally well. And I think when you get a chance to have a look through the chat room before you jump off, you'll see some acknowledgement of your thoughts and bringing your whole self to the table. So I just want to thank you again for your time. I think someone commented on Facebook or in the chat that they looking forward to the road trip and they've invited you to the Banks Peninsula. So yeah, we'll think about how we can get this crew on the road, to share their knowledge with you all. And Tami, there's a wee prompt for you from Caroline to announce something. So I'm just going to draw your attention to that before you wrap up.
I can't multitask. So what we might do is we might announce the winner of the competition later and we'll contact them via that. But thank you to those who entered the competition. We'll be in touch with our prizes after this. But again, thank you to everyone. Thank you for joining. Thank you to our guests. And for those of you who we didn't get a chance to answer the questions, if our guests happen to see that, we'll try to get them to answer it, but we'll try to get a written up version of this with some of those questions prompt onto there as well. Engari, ko tai ki te otinga o tēnei hui, tēnei ka tuku mihi ki a koutou anō, kia hoti ai tēnei hui, me kara ki a tātou, mā te wahi ngāro tātou e manaki, e tiaki, kia noho haumaru koutou katoa I roto I o whare, tūturu whakamaua kia tīna, haumia hui e, tai ki. Thank you everyone. Right. I'm going to hang on and just chat to our guests if they want to stay on. Don't be too casual with the language just yet, everyone. We are still live on Facebook. Once that cuts, then you can get loose.